Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening wherever you are around the world. This is Light Up. Today I will be your host, Shalom Toloranju, and here I have my co-host, Emmanuel Oluabi. Hi, how are you?
Good. How about you?
I'm good, thanks for asking. Today our topic will be about trusting in God based off of the story Noah's Ark, which was located in Genesis chapters 6 to 9. So, God was at this time God was very disappointed with what the humans on earth were doing because what they were doing was very wicked, selfish, and just did not show like righteous characteristics. So he told one of the people that were righteous to build an ark, and his name was Noah. So Noah, being very righteous, he actually trusted in God that, oh, I know that whatever God has in plan is going to work, and he's going to make sure that, like, anything, he doesn't question God. He just knows that what he's going to do is going to be good. So he builds an ark, and God gives him all of the descriptions about how big, how tall, how like long the boat should be, and eventually Noah finishes building it. But while he was building it, a lot of people came and like were like, "Oh, you're just doing this for no reason. God's not going to do anything. He's just God." And they were doubting what God could do. But Noah ignored them and continued to build the ark. So when he finished, God eventually told him to gather some animals, about like a pair of each animal, so that they could reproduce and continue living. And he told Noah to bring his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives, so that they would all like be on the ark and be safe. So Noah gathered everybody and everything, and God cast like a large flood that went all over the earth and was very like deep. So it was like an ocean, but it was just caused by probably a lot of rain. So for the time being that this was like happening, obviously a lot of people were killed, and basically everybody except for Noah and everybody else, they were like the only ones alive, because God's purpose was to wipe away all of the wicked people. It was like God's way of restarting like human life. And I don't like I'm pretty sure it was about like 40 days and 40 nights that this occurred. And after all of this happened, eventually it took a very long time for the water itself to drain. But when it did, and mind you, Noah had a lot of patience. He didn't question God like, oh my gosh, how much longer is this going to take? He was like, I understand that God is doing what he's doing, and I'm not going to question his abilities. So he waited and waited until all the flood was gone and it was safe to like be on land. And eventually, when they came back, all was like good, and all of the wicked people were gone. And yeah, what do you think about that?
I agree with you because if Noah didn't have the faith or a belief that God would have done what he said he would have done, Noah would be as a part of the flood, just as long as his family and his everyone in his family, all because Noah didn't believe in what God did. And one reason, and that also gives us a lesson, is that every sin on earth that we commit has a consequence. Because when when God started the flood, it was because of the earth's wickedness. He punished them, which are which also shows that when we sin, there will always be a consequence out of it. But when we do something right, there'll always be something. There'll always be a reward at the end of it. Like how Noah what got a reward because he was righteous and he also believed God. What do you think about that?
I agree with you, and I think that what like Noah was doing was very good. That he didn't doubt God, he had obedience and all those other like attributes of a righteous man like Noah. And I also forgot to mention, but in the story at the end, God gave a covenant that like, and if you don't know what a covenant is, it's like a very like it's a promise that's a very very big deal. Like if you break it, it's like it's over. And a covenant can really only be done by God because God always keeps his word, which is something else we should remember. And the way God sent this covenant was that he put a rainbow, as we know today, when it rains and there's like sunlight, a rainbow like forms. And that was God's way of telling Noah that he would never flood the earth like that ever again. And till this day, God has kept his promise. Um, a lesson we could like take from what Noah did during, before, during, and after the whole situation, he had a lot of patience, he had obedience, and he had a lot of righteousness, which in general was everything he did. Because if it weren't for his like trust in God, then probably every single human on earth would have like went bye bye, and God would have to create humans all over again. And that could affect us now. We probably wouldn't even look like this, or just something else would be different in God's plan. What do you think about that?
I agree with you. And one lesson that we can take from what you said is that how God always keeps his word. And one reason that will stick out to most people is because, in one way it should, is because God is the only one who can keep a promise and won't break it. Like, like how sometimes your friend at school may promise to give you something or promise to do something with you, but then when you ask them about it, when it's time to do it or the time for them to give it to you, you ask them about it, and then they say they say no, I never made that. Which is also a way that people break promises by lying and saying that they never made that promise. And God will never do that since He's the only one who can actually keep a promise, and as you said, he's the only person who can actually create a covenant because his promises are never broken. And another thing that we can learn from what Noah did is that, as you said, that he was patient. Because if he didn't have any patience when he was trying to build that ark, he would have built it incorrectly. And instead of him being able to survive, he probably would have drowned along with everyone else because God gave him instructions of how big, tall, and wide the boat should be. So Noah also had never-ending patience. What do you think about that?
I agree with you, and I think another lesson we could learn from this story was about God's justice and mercy. The flood demonstrates God's judgment on like sin, but the ark itself represents his mercy and desire to save Noah and his family, because if he hadn't have told Noah and his family, he would have to restart his whole plan. And based off of the knowledge we know, he didn't want to restart his plan. He was proud of what he had made. He just wasn't proud of what his creation was doing. And that also contributes to our modern day life, because there's a lot of people that are like doing a lot of sins. They say they don't care about God, or they like to ask many questions that seem hard to answer, but it's just that they can't take that answer as an answer. For example, they say like something like who created God? And when you tell them that nobody created God, he was the creator of everything, they'll be like, no, that's not possible. Every creation has a creator. But here that's not true. And that's like something we should try to like be able to tell other people about God and his merciful ways, the way we can tell them these stories, which is like the whole point of Light Up, to tell like other people about stories in the Bible that contribute to everything God has done for us and why you should believe him. What do you think about that?
When God talks about no, one thing I'd like to go back is the story because when God talked after Noah and his family gets on the ark, along the animals that God tells them to bring. When we talk about God having a never ending promise, and also here because God also remembered Noah and his family still being on the ark. So after the 40 days and 40 nights, as he said, God ends the flood and he also blesses the family so they can be fruitful and we and population can go up, up, up and up. So one thing we learn from that is that anything that we do will always have a reward and that God's planning, time, and what he says will always come to pass, just like his judgment, because God's judgment is always right or will come to pass because God is never wrong. Since he created everything, he can't be wrong with anything that he says or does. So that's one thing we need to know when somebody asks us that what if God makes a mistake? Which is no, because that's not possible. God can't make a mistake. He made everything. How can he make a mistake? So one way that we can apply some of these lessons that we've talked about is that first, we can talk about how the earth and its wickedness was the reason that God caused the flood, was because their wickedness grieved God, and then he flooded the earth. And one thing we should also take from that and apply from it is that when we want to sin, we need to think about what the sin. We need to think about the consequence and if it's really okay for us to do it or not. Because sin is what caused the flood in the first place. Sin and them just ignoring God and what he tells them to do. So what do you think about that?
I agree with you. And when you were saying how it was a very good thing that God had mercy on Noah and his like family, I also think it was a good thing that he like also had mercy on the animals because everyone would really think that, oh, God really like also thought about the animals, but in this case you have to think about the animals because without the animals it will only be humans. Humans would just be only eating fruit, which doesn't really like pertain to our actual diet. And another thing is that we when you were saying we need to think about some we need to think before we like do a sin or do anything at all, that also like contributes to having discernment. And in my own words, I would say discernment is when you like know when something is right and when something is wrong. When you it's kind of like an instinct, like it's something everybody should know. Even if you're not a Christian, you should know like, oh, should I really go and steal this piece of fruit because I'm like 5 cents short? like your mind should already be telling you, oh, my parents have taught me about this, even if they aren't Christian. Everyone should already know stealing is bad. And that goes for a lot of other things like adultery, um, murder, and a lot of other sins that are in like the Ten Commandments or just mentioned in the Bible at all. And we should always be like mindful of the things we do because there's a lot of things that may not look like they're bad, but eventually when you really think about it, it is something bad. What do you think about that? Or are there any other like points you would like to share before we like say the lessons learned?
No.
Okay, so I can name two lessons and you can name the like other lessons we learned from the story. So two lessons we could learn from this story is that God had mercy the on Noah's family and the animals because he we know that if God didn't do that, it would be like very unfair to Noah and those animals because the animals weren't being wicked, they were just being animals. They didn't even know what was going on. That's a good reason why God is still decided to keep them because with them, then there'll be no animals and that could really like mess up the whole thing. And if there are no humans, it wouldn't like he would have to restart his creation, which I'm sure a lot of people know he did not want to do. And another lesson we could learn is that we should always have faith because when Noah was first notified about what he had to do, he in his mind he was probably confused and he was like, why do I have to build an ark that's so big and for a flood that is only gonna fit some animals and my family? How come like other people aren't doing that or anything and how come I'm the only one doing it? But eventually we will like even if we never understand God's plan, we'll always know that there's a reason for what he does. He doesn't do something just to do it. He always has a reason to do something. And those are two lessons we could learn. What are the other lessons we learned?
Some of the other lessons that we learned is that when we are righteous, God will save us from his wrath that he will send to the enemies, which is the sinners. Like how when Noah was righteous, he wasn't part of the flood. Same, so was his family. But everyone else was since they rebelled on God and didn't listen to him. And we also learned that God will always keep his word since he'll never break any promises. We also learned that God's judgment is always right or will come to pass. Like how Noah built the ark without any appearance of the flood. He still built the ark anyway without any questions. And Noah's belief, which also can translate to our belief, can save us from anything that God will do to sin the to sinners or the world in general. And that's all I have for today.
All right, thanks for sharing the rest of our lessons. Thank you so much for joining us today at Light Up, and we hope you can share, like, comment, and especially subscribe. Bye. Have a good day or night or afternoon.
Bye.